The private viewing room smelled of lemon oil and old money. It was a place designed to honor history, yet the couple waiting outside was only interested in erasing it for a quick profit. I'm Kelly Ford. To the world, I am the expert who fixes priceless antiques. But as I stared at the client list, I wasn't an expert. I was just the 14-year-old girl they discarded because I broke a vase they loved more than me. They came here today expecting a $2 million payday to fund their retirement. They had no idea they were asking the clumsy destroyer to sign the check. The room was silent. It was the kind of silence you have to buy. It was the silence of thick carpets, temperature-controlled air, and triple-paned glass. I sat at the workbench, my back straight, my elbows resting on the padded foam blocks. I didn't breathe. Not really. I had trained myself to sip air in between the beats of my heart. When you are holding a shard of pottery from the 16th century, you cannot afford to tremble. You cannot afford to be human. You have to be an instrument. I reached for the magnification lamp. Click. The light flooded the table, illuminating the spiderweb fracture on the ceramic bowl in front of me. It was beautiful in a tragic sort of way. Someone had dropped this bowl 300 years ago. They had probably cried over it. And now, 3 centuries later, I was going to make it whole again. My name is Kelly Ford. I am the head conservator for the Northeastern Museum of Antiquities. It is a fancy title. It means I spend my days in the back rooms of auction houses and galleries, fixing the mistakes of clumsy people. I have a reputation. They say I have the hands of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. They say I can make a crack disappear until even the original artist wouldn't know it had been broken. It is ironic, really. I built my entire life, my entire fortune on the art of restoration. I fix things. I glue the pieces back together. But I do it because I know exactly what it feels like to be shattered. I set the scalpel down. The metal made a soft scrape against the table. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the viewing room. I saw a woman in a silk blouse and a tailored skirt. I saw a woman who commanded respect. I saw a woman who was safe. But if I looked long enough, the reflection changed. I didn't see the head conservator. I saw a 14-year-old girl with knobby knees and a terrified expression. I saw the girl who was thrown away because she made a mistake. I hadn't seen my parents in 14 years, but I could still hear the clock. That is the sound I remember most. The grandfather clock in the hallway of my childhood home. It was a heavy, ominous thing. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It sounded like a judge pounding a gavel over and over again. I was 14. It was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because the housekeeper was off, and my mother insisted that the Ming collection be dusted. My parents, Robert and Elise, were not warm people. They were collectors. They loved things. They loved objects that had history and provenance. They loved their mahogany table, their Persian rugs, and most of all, they loved the 6 blue and white vases that sat on the mantel. They told me those vases were worth a fortune. They told me they were the family legacy. They told me to be careful. I was always careful. I moved through that house like a ghost, terrified of disturbing the placement of a throw pillow or leaving a footprint on the carpet. I was dusting the 3rd vase. It was the tall one with the dragon painted on the side. The vacuum cleaner was running in the other room. My father was vacuuming the study, and the noise was making me anxious. The vibration hummed through the floorboards. I reached up with the feather duster. My sleeve, a loose cotton thing I had outgrown, caught the edge of the ceramic lip. It happened in slow motion. I felt the tug on my wrist. I gasped. I tried to lunge forward to catch it, but I was too small and the vase was too heavy. It tipped. For 1 second it hung in the air, a suspended moment of pure white-hot terror. I prayed. I begged God to let it float. Then gravity took over. Crash. The sound was explosive. It wasn't just a break, it was a detonation. Thousands of blue and white shards sprayed across the hardwood floor. The vacuum cleaner stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. I stood there, shaking tears already hot in my eyes, my hands hovering over the mess. My parents appeared in the doorway. They stood side by side like statues. They didn't scream. Screaming would have been better. Screaming implies passion. Screaming implies that they were upset because they were scared. They weren't scared. They were cold. My father walked over and looked at the pile of rubble. He didn't look at me. He looked at the empty spot on the mantel. "You clumsy destroyer," he said. His voice was flat. "Do you know what you've done?" "I'm sorry," I whispered. I could barely breathe. "Daddy, I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix a Ming vase, Kelly," my mother said. She looked at me with a look of pure disgust. It was the look you give to a stray dog that has muddied your porch. That vase was worth more than your entire education. It was worth more than you will likely ever earn. I fell to my knees. I tried to pick up the pieces. I cut my finger on a sharp edge of porcelain. A drop of red blood fell onto the white shard. "Stop it," my father snapped. "Don't bleed on the floor. You've done enough damage." They sent me away the next week. They said they couldn't afford to have a liability in the house. They said I was too expensive to keep around if I was going to destroy their investments. They shipped me off to a great aunt in Ohio. I packed one suitcase. They didn't hug me goodbye. My father just handed me a bus ticket and told me to try not to lose it. That was 14 years ago. I never went back. I never called. And they never came looking for me. The memory faded as the heavy oak door of the viewing room opened. I blinked, pushing the 14-year-old girl back into the shadows of my mind. I took a breath. 1, 2, 3. I was Kelly Ford. I was the expert. The auction house manager, a nervous man named David, walked in. He was clutching a clipboard to his chest like a shield. "Ms. Ford," he said, "the sellers are here." I didn't turn around immediately. I picked up a soft chamois cloth and wiped the dust from the bowl I was working on. "You told them the appraisal fee is non-refundable." "Yes, ma'am," David said. He shifted his weight. "They are quite insistent. They say the collection is worth $2.5 million. They are planning to retire on the proceeds. They specifically requested the best conservator on the East Coast to verify the condition." $2.5 million, I repeated. The number hung in the air. "Yes, it's the Ford Estate collection, a set of 5 Ming Dynasty vases." My hand froze on the cloth. The Ford Estate. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but my hand remained steady. Of course, they were selling them. They were finally cashing in on the things they loved more than their daughter. I turned my swivel chair around slowly. "Who is representing the estate?" "A Mr. and Mrs. Robert Ford," David said. "They are in the waiting room. Shall I tell them you're busy?" I looked at David. I looked past him at the closed double doors. Beyond those doors sat the 2 people who had taught me that love was conditional. They were out there waiting for their money. They were waiting for their payday. They had no idea who was waiting for them. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my silk skirt. I picked up my clipboard and my magnifying loupe. "No, David," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a surgeon before the first cut. "Don't send them away. Send them in. If you believe that no child should ever be treated like a financial burden by their own parents, please hit the like button to show your support." I heard the heavy mahogany doors creak open behind me. I didn't turn around. I kept my back to the room, my eyes fixed on the shelving unit in front of me. I busied myself with a stack of intake forms, but my ears were straining. I was listening for the sounds of my past. The first thing I heard was the click-clack of hard-soled shoes on the parquet floor. It was a confident, aggressive rhythm. Click-clack, click-clack. Then a voice. "Is there no one to take our coats?" It was my father, Robert. His voice hadn't changed. It still had that sharp nasal edge to it, like he was constantly disappointed by the service of the world. "The girl said to wait here, Robert," a woman replied. "My mother." "Elise? Though it is stifling in here. I hope the humidity doesn't affect the patina on the collection. You know how sensitive the glaze can be." "It's fine, Elise. Stop fussing," Robert snapped. "Where is this head conservator? We are on a tight schedule. The realtor in Sarasota is expecting our call by 5. I stood perfectly still. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a trapped bird in a cage. I took a slow breath. 1, 2, 3. I watched their reflection in the glass of the display case in front of me. They looked older. My father's hair was entirely white now, thinning at the crown. My mother was gripping her handbag with white knuckles, but as I looked closer, the image of wealth began to crack. My father was wearing his favorite navy suit, the one he used to wear to board meetings. But in the harsh gallery lighting, the fabric looked tired. There was a distinct fray on his left cuff. His shoes, though polished, were worn down at the heels. My mother's coat was a designer brand, but it was a style from 10 years ago. "I just want this done," Robert muttered, lowering his voice. "If this appraiser knows what they are doing, we should clear 2.5, maybe 3. 2.5 million, my mother whispered. The hunger in her voice was palpable. "That clears the bridge loan. It pays off the Audi. We can buy the condo outright, Robert. No mortgage. Finally, some peace." "We just need to make sure the valuation is certified," Robert said. "Once we have the paper, the bank will release the funds. We'll be set for life." They weren't here to say goodbye to family heirlooms. They were here to cash out. They were selling the only things they had ever loved to save themselves from financial ruin. They were desperate. I looked down at the 5 vases sitting on the preparation table. They were stunning at a glance. Blue dragons danced across white clouds. The shape was elegant, the necks slender and graceful. To the untrained eye, they were masterpieces of the Ming dynasty. I reached out and touched the rim of the nearest vase. It was cool to the touch. I ran my thumb over the lip. My skin caught on something microscopic. I frowned. I pulled my jeweler's magnifying glass from my pocket and held it to my eye. I leaned in close, hovering inches from the porcelain. I looked at the blue pigment. In genuine Ming porcelain, the cobalt blue is often uneven. It bubbles slightly under the glaze. It looks like it is breathing. I looked at this blue. It was flat. It was perfect. It was too perfect. I moved the glass down to the brush strokes of the dragon's eye. I saw a tiny, almost invisible uniform grid pattern in the shading. My stomach dropped. I moved to the second vase. Same pattern. I moved to the third. Same pattern. I felt a gasp rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down. My mind raced back to when I was 14. I remembered the awe in my father's voice when he talked about these vases. I remembered the terror I felt when I dusted them. I realized with a sudden clarity that made me dizzy that my parents didn't know. They actually didn't know? "Excuse me," Robert's voice boomed from behind me. "Are you the assistant we are waiting for the head conservator?" It was time. I lowered the magnifying loupe. I took a deep breath, smoothing the expression on my face into a mask of professional indifference. I turned around. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Ford," I said. My parents stopped. They looked at me. There was no flicker of recognition in their eyes. They saw a woman in her late 20s wearing a tailored charcoal suit, hair pulled back in a severe bun. They saw a stranger. "Finally," Robert huffed. "We were told you are the best. We need this authentication done quickly. We have a flight to catch." "I am the best," I said softly. My mother squinted at me. She tilted her head to the side, a gesture I remembered from 1,000 lectures. You look familiar, she said. Have we used your firm before? No, I said. I stepped out from behind the table. You haven't. I walked toward them. I stopped 5 feet away. I let the silence stretch out, forcing them to look at me. Really, look at me. Hello, mother. Hello, father. The color drained from Elise's face instantly. She grabbed Robert's arm. Kelly. Robert stared. His mouth opened, then closed. He blinked rapidly. Kelly, is that you? It's been a long time, I said. There was no hug. There was no step forward. There was only a thick, uncomfortable tension. Robert straightened his tie, looking annoyed, rather than relieved. Well, Robert said, clearing his throat. This is unexpected. We heard you were doing well, working in the city. I said. I'm the head conservator here. You, Robert let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a happy sound, it was a bark. You're the expert on fragile pottery that is rich. Ah, I suppose irony is alive and well. I have steady hands now, I said. Let's hope so, he said. He glanced at the vases on the table, then back at me. Well, at least you found a job where you can't break anything that belongs to us. Yet. It was a small comment, a throwaway line, but it was designed to hurt. It was designed to remind me of my place. I was the clumsy child. He was the owner. Kelly. My mother said, her voice tight. This is a business transaction. We need a professional valuation. Can you be professional, or is this going to be some sort of emotional display? I am always professional, I said. My voice was ice. That is why you are here. Good, Elise said. She clutched her purse tighter. Because we need a high valuation, Kelly. Don't be spiteful just because we had to send you away. We did what was best for you, and now this money is our future. We need you to price them at the top of the market. I price them at what they are worth, I said. I walked back to the table. I picked up a pair of white cotton gloves and pulled them on, snapping the elastic at the wrist. Before I finalize the paperwork, I said, keeping my back to them, I need to verify the provenance, the history of the items. We told the manager already, Robert said, impatient. Tell me, I insisted. I turned to face them, pen poised over my clipboard. Where did these vases come from? Robert puffed out his chest. He fell into the story I had heard 1,000 times as a child. My grandfather, Robert declared. General Ford. He brought them back from an expedition in China in the 1920s. They were a gift from a high-ranking official. They have been in the family for 100 years. They are pristine examples of the Ming era. You are certain? I asked. You have the documentation. The papers were lost in a flood years ago, Elise interjected quickly. But the story is absolute fact. Everyone knows it. They are the crown jewels of the Ford family. They are priceless, Robert added, and we expect the appraisal to reflect that. I looked at my father. I looked at the fray on his cuff. I looked at the lie sitting comfortably in his mouth. He didn't know the truth about the vases, but he was willing to bully me into validating his fantasy. He wanted me to sign a lie so he could live in luxury while he continued to look down on me. Thank you, I said. I clipped the pen to the board. That is all the information I need. So, Robert demanded, what is the number 2.53 out, please? I said, gesturing to the chairs on the other side of the table. Take a seat. We need to discuss the details. Just sign the paper, Kelly, Robert snapped. Sit down, father, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the authority of the head conservator of the Northeastern Museum of Antiquities. For the first time in his life, my father listened to me. He sat. Have you ever dealt with relatives who only seem to care about you when there is money involved? Don't be shy to share your story in the comments below. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed. It was a low electric buzz that seemed to drill directly into my skull. We sat around the heavy oak table. My parents, Robert and Elise, were on one side. I was on the other. Between us sat the 5 blue and white vases. They looked triumphant. They looked like they had already won the lottery. "We have the listing ready for the Sarasota property," my mother said. She was speaking to my father, but she was looking at me. She wanted me to hear it. 4 bedrooms, a pool. It's in a gated community, Robert. Finally some security. "And the club membership," Robert added. He drummed his fingers on the table. Tap, tap, tap. "I've already spoken to the membership director. I told him the funds would be liquid by the end of the month." "We just need the signature," Elise said. She smiled at me. It was a tight plastic smile. "Kelly, dear, how much longer the transfer truck is waiting outside?" I didn't look up. I was writing notes on my clipboard. I wasn't writing about the vases. I was writing down the things I was hearing: greed, desperation, delusion. "The analysis is thorough," I said quietly. "It takes time." "It shouldn't take this long to recognize perfection," Robert snapped. His patience was fraying. "You've looked at them for 20 minutes. You've used your little magnifying glass. You've poked and prodded. Just sign the damn paper so we can get our money." "We have debts, Kelly," Elise said. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trying to solicit pity. "Significant debts. Your father—" "Well, the market hasn't been kind. We need this. This collection is our lifeline." I stopped writing. I looked at the vase in the center. The dragon painted on the side seemed to be mocking me. "It is a lifeline," Robert agreed. He leaned back, crossing his arms. He looked at the empty space on the table where the 6th vase should have been. Then he said it. I knew he would. He couldn't help himself. "It's a shame about the set being incomplete, really," Robert said. He let out a sigh that sounded more like a hiss. "If we had the full 6, we could command nearly $3 million. But we lost that equity years ago." He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Because of you," he said. "Because you were careless. You smashed a fortune on the living room floor. That cost us thousands, Kelly. We could have had even more today if you hadn't been such a clumsy destroyer." The air left the room. That name. Clumsy destroyer. It was the name he used when he sent me away. It was the name that defined my adolescence. I felt a flash of heat in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I placed my pen down on the table. Click. "I remember," I said. My voice was steady. "I remember every second of that day." "Good," Robert said. "Maybe guilt will make you write a higher number." I stood up. I picked up the clipboard. I looked at my parents. I saw the fraying cuffs. I saw the terror behind their arrogance. I saw 2 people who had built their entire identity on things they didn't understand. "I have completed the analysis," I said. "Finally," Elise exhaled. "And 2.5. The valuation I said, "is finalized." I turned the clipboard around and slid it across the table. Robert snatched it up. He looked at the bottom line. His face went pale. Then it went red. A deep, violent flush that started at his neck and rose to his hairline. "What is this?" he whispered. "Read it," I said. $500. Robert screamed. He slammed the clipboard down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Is this a joke? Is this some kind of sick, vindictive joke?" Elise gasped. She grabbed the paper. $500? Robert, what is she doing?" "She's lying!" Robert shouted. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "She's doing this out of spite. She wants to punish us because we sent her away." "I am not lying," I said. I didn't flinch. "You are a liar." Robert pointed a shaking finger at my face. "These are Ming Dynasty. My grandfather brought them from China. They are priceless." "They are not Ming," I said. I cut through his shouting with a voice like a razor blade. And they are not from China. How dare you? Elise hissed. How dare you sabotage your own family? Look at the table, Mother So, I commanded. I picked up the central vase. I held it up. My hands were perfectly steady. Look at the bottom, I said. I turned the vase over. It's a mark, Robert spat. A dynasty seal. No, I said. It is a pseudo-mark. Look closer. I grabbed my magnification loupe and held it in front of Robert's face. He recoiled, but he looked. Do you see that cross-hatch pattern in the red ink? I asked. Do you see the slight bleed of the glaze around the rim? Robert stared. He didn't answer. That is the signature of Edmé Samson, I said. Samson of Paris. The room went silent. Paris, Elise whispered. Edmé Samson was a famous copyist in the late 19th century. I explained. I slipped into my lecture voice. It was the only thing keeping me grounded. He made high-quality reproductions for the European market. He made copies of Meissen of Chelsea and, yes, of Chinese Ming porcelain. I set the vase down gently. These were made in a factory in France in the 1880s, I said. They were sold to tourists. They were decorative pieces for middle-class mantels. They were never real. They were never priceless. No, Robert said. He shook his head. No, grandfather said. Your grandfather lied, I said. Or he was swindled. Either way, the result is the same. These are fakes. Good fakes, but fakes. You're wrong, Robert insisted. His voice was cracking now. The anger was draining away, replaced by a horrifying realization. You don't know what you're looking at. You're just a girl. You're just the girl who broke things. I am the head conservator, I said, and I know exactly what I am looking at. They have to be real, Elise moaned. She slumped into her chair. They have to be. We have nothing else. The house. The debts. They are worth about $100 apiece, I said brutally. Maybe less at a quick sale. The entire collection is worth $500. Total. Robert looked at the vases. He looked at them as if they had betrayed him. He looked at the blue dragons he had worshipped for 40 years. But, Robert stammered, but the one you broke. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide. You broke one. You broke it into 1,000,000 pieces. If these are fakes, then... I smiled. It was a sad, tired smile. That's the irony, Father, I said. I walked around the table. I stood right next to him. I studied the shard counts, I said. When I was in school, I wrote a paper on ceramic fracture mechanics. I used the memory of that day as my case study. I remembered how the light hit the pieces. I remembered the sound. I paused. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The vase I broke, I said softly. It didn't shatter like these would. These are hard-paste porcelain. They snap. The one I broke, it crumbled. It had a different density, a different colon content. Robert was staring at me. He wasn't breathing. What are you saying? He whispered. I'm saying that your grandfather was a showman, I said. He probably couldn't afford a full set of Ming vases, so he bought one real, authentic, priceless masterpiece. And then he filled the rest of the shelf with 5 cheap French copies to make it look like a collection. I gestured to the 5 vases on the table. These are the fakes, I said. These are the props. I leaned in closer. The vase I broke 14 years ago, I said. The one you kicked me out for, that was the only real one. Robert made a sound like he had been punched in the gut. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. It was worth, in today's market, I estimated, for a piece of that provenance alone. Probably $2 million. Elise let out a wail. She covered her mouth with her hand. You destroyed it, Robert whispered. You destroyed the money. I was 14, I said. I was a child. I made a mistake. I looked at the 5 cheap vases standing in a row. But you, I said, you treated the fakes like royalty and you treated your daughter like garbage. And now you have exactly what you deserve. You have $500, I said, and you have your pride. I stepped back. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a life crashing down. And just so we are clear, I added, I am not charging you for the appraisal. Consider it a final gift. The air felt thin. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room, leaving only the stale taste of desperation. My mother, Elise, started to cry. It wasn't a soft weeping sound. It was an ugly, guttural sob. She wasn't crying for me. She wasn't crying for the years we had lost. She was crying because the numbers in her head, the retirement villa, the bridge games, the easy life were evaporating like mist. This can't be happening, she moaned, rocking back and forth in her chair. We budgeted everything. We promised the bank. My father, Robert, didn't cry. He turned red. The kind of dangerous, blotchy red that signals a man who is used to getting his way and has suddenly hit a brick wall. He lunged forward. He grabbed the clipboard from the table, his knuckles white. He shook it in my face. You are incompetent, he screamed. Spittle flew from his lips. You are doing this on purpose. You are a vindictive, hateful child who wants to see us suffer. I am telling you the truth, I said calmly. You're lying, Robert roared. He turned to the door. I want the manager. I want the owner. I'm going to have you fired. I'm going to sue this entire establishment for fraud. You're trying to ruin us, Elise wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. After everything we did for you, we gave you a roof over your head. We gave you an education. You gave me a bus ticket, I reminded her. Because you were a destroyer, Robert shouted. And you're still doing it. You're destroying us. The door to the private viewing room opened. It wasn't David, the nervous manager. It was Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling owns the auction house. He is a man of few words and immense gravity. He is in his 70s, always wears a 3-piece suit and carries a silver-handled cane, not because he needs it, but because he likes the sound it makes on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. He walked into the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The hysteria seemed to freeze. Is there a problem? Mr. Sterling asked. His voice was deep like gravel rolling in a barrel. Robert spun around. He straightened his jacket, trying to compose himself, but his eyes were wild. Yes, there is a problem, Sterling, Robert said, pointing at me. Your appraiser is a fraud. She is lying to us about the value of my collection. She has a personal vendetta against my family. Mr. Sterling stopped. He looked at Robert. Then he looked at the vases on the table. Finally, he looked at me. Ms. Ford, Mr. Sterling said, is this true? The items are Samson reproductions, sir, I said. Late 19th century. I have verified the maker's marks and the clay composition. They are decorative fakes. Robert laughed. It was a high, desperate sound. She's insane. My grandfather brought these from the Forbidden City. They are worth millions. Mr. Sterling walked over to the table. He didn't pick up the vases. He simply leaned down and looked at them. He adjusted his spectacles. He stared at the glaze for a long, silent minute. Then he straightened up. Mr. Ford, Mr. Sterling said, I have known Ms. Ford for 5 years. She has identified forgeries that fooled the curators at the Met. She has the finest eye on the East Coast. Robert opened his mouth to argue, but Mr. Sterling held up a hand. If Ms. Ford says they are Samson reproductions, Mr. Sterling continued his voice, leaving no room for debate. Then that is what they are? But, Robert stammered. I will not auction fakes in my house, Mr. Sterling said. It would ruin my reputation. And frankly, sir, bringing them here and presenting them as genuine Ming is an insult to my staff. We didn't know, Elise cried. We thought. Ignorance is not a currency I accept, Mr. Sterling said coldly. He turned to me. Ms. Ford, have you concluded your business with these clients? Yes, sir, I said. Very good. Mr. Sterling turned back to my parents. Please remove these items from the premises immediately. We have serious collectors arriving in an hour, and I need this room cleared. He turned and walked out. Tap, tap, tap. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence returned. But this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of a grave. Robert slumped against the table. The fight had gone out of him. He looked old. Suddenly undeniably old. The bluster, the arrogance, the stories of the grandfather, it was all gone. We have nothing, he whispered. The house in Florida. Elise sobbed. We'll lose the deposit and the current mortgage. Robert, we're 3 months behind. If we don't pay by Friday, we'll be on the street, Robert finished. He stared at the floor. We banked everything on these vases. Everything. He looked at the 5 blue and white objects, the things he had protected, the things he had loved. They're worthless, he said. Just painted clay. $500, Elise wept. My God, $500. I watched them. I should have felt triumphant. This was the moment I had dreamed of for years. The villains were defeated. The cruel parents who valued objects over their child were now destroyed by those very objects. It was poetic justice. It was perfect. But as I watched my father's shoulders shake and heard my mother's terrified whimpering, I didn't feel happy. I felt tired. I looked at my hands, the hands that fixed broken things. I realized then that if I let them leave like this, if I let them walk out into ruin, I would be just like them. I would be using my power to hurt. I would be the destroyer. They were broken, just like the vase I dropped 14 years ago. The difference was I knew how to put things back together. I bet they didn't see that coming. Let me know in the comments if you guessed that Mr. Sterling would side with Kelly. I stood in the corner of the room and watched them pack. It was a quiet, pathetic process. There were no more servants to do it for them. There were no movers. Just an old man and an old woman folding cardboard flaps and wrapping priceless porcelain in cheap bubble wrap. Crinkle. Snap. Tape. My father's hands were shaking. He struggled with the tape dispenser. He looked frail. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the giant who commanded the room. I saw a man whose suit was too big for his shrinking frame. My mother Elise wasn't helping. She was sitting on the edge of a chair staring blankly at the wall. She looked like a ghost. The deposit, she whispered mostly to herself. We'll lose the deposit on the condo, and the car lease is up on Tuesday. We'll figure it out, Robert mumbled, though his voice lacked any conviction. We'll sell the silver. We have the silver. The silver is plated, Robert, Elise said. Her voice was hollow. It's all plated. Everything we have is plated. They were drowning. Right there in front of me, they were sinking into a bog of debt and deception that they had dug for themselves over 40 years. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pity. Pity is soft. Pity is warm. This was colder. It was recognition. I recognized the fear. I knew exactly what it felt like to be thrown out of a house with nowhere to go. I knew what it felt like to have your world shatter because of a mistake. I looked at the door. I could let them walk out. Justice said I should. Justice said they deserved every ounce of this misery. They had valued cold, hard objects over their own flesh and blood. They had cast me out to protect a lie. It would be poetic to let the truth destroy them. But I wasn't them. I looked at my hands, the hands that healed fractures, the hands that saved history. If I let them leave like this, crushed and destitute, I would be carrying them with me forever. Their failure would be my shadow. I would still be the daughter seeking revenge. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. And peace, I realized, is something you have to buy. Wait, I said. My father paused. He held a roll of packing tape in his hand. He looked at me warily like a beaten dog expecting another kick. What is it? He asked. We're leaving. We're going. I walked over to my leather satchel. I unbuckled it. Snap. Snap. I pulled out my checkbook. It was a simple rectangular book, but in that moment it felt heavier than the vases. Put the boxes down, Father, I said. Why? Because I'm buying them, I said. My mother's head snapped up. A spark of life returned to her eyes. It was a greedy, desperate spark. You're buying the collection, she asked. Her voice trembled. For the valuation $2 million. I looked at her. Even now, at the edge of the cliff, she was trying to negotiate. No, I said firmly. I told you the value. They are worth $500. Elise slumped back down. I uncapped my pen. I opened the book. I wrote the date. I am not paying for the vases. I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room. I am paying for the arrears on your mortgage. I am paying for your groceries for the next year. I am paying for you to have a cushion so you don't end up on the street. I wrote the number 50000. $50,000, I said. Robert stared at the pen. He licked his lips. 50,000. It is enough to clear your immediate debts, I said. It is enough to give you time to sell the house properly and downsize. It is a lifeline. I tore the check out of the book. The sound was sharp. Rip. I held it out. But there are conditions, I said. Robert reached for it, his hand trembling. I pulled it back slightly. What conditions? He asked. First, I said, gesturing to the boxes. The vases stay here. I never want to see them in your possession again. They are a lie, and I am retiring them. Fine, Robert said quickly. Keep them. They're trash anyway. Second, I said. I looked him in the eye. I looked at the man who had called me a clumsy destroyer. You take this money, and you go. You do not contact me. You do not ask for more. You do not tell people we are reconciled. We are not. I paused. I am not doing this because I love you, I said. I am doing this because I refuse to be cruel. I am breaking the cycle. I extended the check again. Robert looked at me. For a second, I thought he might have a moment of clarity. I thought he might apologize. I thought he might say, I'm proud of you, or I'm sorry. But he didn't. He was who he was. He snatched the check from my fingers. He looked at the amount, verifying the zeros. He let out a breath of relief. Come on, Elise, he said, stuffing the check into his pocket. Let's go. Elise stood up. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. She grabbed her purse and followed him. They walked to the door. The sound of their footsteps faded. Click-clack, click-clack. The heavy mahogany door opened, and then it closed. Thud. I was alone. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't heavy. It was clean. I walked over to the table. I looked at the 5 blue and white vases, the Ming collection. They sat there innocent and beautiful. They were just objects. They were just painted clay fired in a kiln in Paris 100 years ago. They hadn't asked to be worshipped. They hadn't asked to destroy a family. We had done that to ourselves. I reached into my toolkit. I pulled out a small steel hammer. It was a delicate tool used for chipping away old plaster. I weighed it in my hand. I could smash them. I could line them up and shatter them one by one. It would feel good. It would sound like victory. Crash, crash, crash. I raised the hammer. Then I lowered it. If I broke them, I would just be creating more shards. I would be making more things that needed to be fixed. And I was done fixing this family. I put the hammer down, I picked up the phone on the wall, and dialed the extension for the archives department. Yes, I said, when the archivist answered. This is Kelly Ford. I have a donation for the study collection. Yes, 5 Samson reproductions. Excellent examples of 19th century forgery. They'll be perfect for teaching students how to spot a lie. I hung up. I walked to the light switch. I took one last look at the room. My parents were gone. The debt was paid. The vases were just clay. I felt lighter than I had in 14 years. I turned off the lights. They taught me that things were more important than people. I paid $50,000 to prove them wrong. It was a bargain. Thank you for spending time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories like this. See you in the next video. Kelly found her peace by walking away, but family betrayal often leaves a mark that money cannot fix. Have you ever had to distance yourself from relatives to protect your own dignity? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. We truly appreciate you being here. There are even more captivating stories waiting for you right on your screen. Please click one now so you don't miss the ending. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. This has been a story from Ashes of Revenge. We'll see you next time.